As President Xi takes power in China, Chinese equities are in retreat. If you think the world is falling apart, yes, yes, it is. Hey everyone, this is Chris. Welcome back to the channel. So I want to go through all of the risks of investing in Chinese stocks and give you my thoughts on these things. I do this a lot on this channel, but I finally put together like a complete list. And if I miss anything, please let me know. But I'm going to show you what I think. So these are the risks of investing in Chinese equities. Number one is President Xi. In fact, it is getting worse and worse by the day. This is something that we've all been talking about for quite a while, but I mean, now it looks like it's official that he's going for a third term, maybe for life. We'll see, and we haven't seen it like this for quite a long time. And unfortunately, like I said, it just seems to be getting worse. Also, too, there is a major threat, and this is probably the biggest one out there, is if China does invade Taiwan. By all accounts, it seems like that they are trying to move up their timeline. And as of late, as a recording of this, Secretary of State Blinken keeps saying that they're aiming for like a 2025 kind of thing. Before timelines are thinking like 2028. We will see. We've heard reports that they've even been recruiting British pilots to help train their pilots, and also Aussie pilots to help train their pilots, and a whole slew of other movements such as building artificial islands, these kind of things. This is something that China will sort of teach all of their people that Taiwan is part of mainland China. And so regular Chinese people would be in support of such an action, and this is a real threat. You got to take it seriously. The other issue as well is who does China hang out with? So at the moment, hanging out with Russia, not so good. I'm sure you guys know. And this has been a big rift between the U.S. and China. And then also, too, hanging out with North Korea and Iran. So all of these things, not so good. And it's really hard to stay, hey, China, what are you doing over there? And essentially the world is kind of being divided into two at the moment. Hopefully we're not in a new Cold War, but I do want to lay out the real risks here. Also, too, President Xi and China, they have the power to outlaw or ban entire industries. We've seen this with the essentially for-profit education industry. You guys know I used to work in China, I used to live in China, and I'm well aware of these sort of structures. It's a big industry. It's a lot of money. And basically they said, you can't make a profit. And basically those industries were wiped out overnight. And so they have the power to do anything that they want, ban textbooks, anything like that, and ban entire industries. The other thing they can do is they can fine any company at any time, or they can take over any company anytime. So this is what makes Chinese stocks extremely risky, because you just don't know what the government wants to do, when they want to do it, and it'll always put a drain or a sort of ceiling on Chinese companies. One of the things that Xi's sort of new doctrine's always been about, hey, I'm not going to let rich get too rich, and he does say this kind of stuff. A lot of it is toward to keep the population at ease and maintain control. Speaking of which, the zero COVID policy has been a real strain on Chinese people. So don't just think Chinese people like to go along with President Xi does. When we're talking about zero COVID, zero tolerance COVID lockdowns, they're talking about like locking entire buildings, saying, only one person for your family can go out and get food once a day. We're talking about closing schools. We're talking about all kinds of things, closing factories, all these things. And this takes a strain on the economy. And also, too, moreover, they actually do want the Moderna vaccine, but the terms that they wanted, they basically wanted Moderna to hand over them the formula, or have Moderna, partner, whereas the Chinese partner will have, way more advantage than Moderna. Moderna didn't want to do these things. So if you want to play games, play ball with China, you got to essentially play by their rules. And at the moment, the zero COVID policy is really hurting the economy of the country. This was just a few days ago, I was recording this, the removal of Hu Jintao in the Congress Party was very, very extremely disturbing. I can't stress that enough. As the former president, right, the president right before Xi Jinping, and just the way he was removed. And if you haven't seen the video, I made a video on that. Do take a look at it. Like I said, it was a very disturbing event, and it was basically in public, forcibly removing the prior president. Just does not a good look in public for anything positive to say about that. Also, too, very similar situation was the very public disappearance of Jack Ma, who was the CEO and founder of Alibaba. And if you guys watch the channel, you'll know I am a big admirer of Jack Ma. And if you ever find the living room sequence where he's sort of preaching to his newly formed employees of how companies in China they can compete with American companies. There's no reason why they can't, and they can work just as hard as Americans, and they can be entrepreneurs. And if they want to be good as Americans, they got to work day and night, etc. And I just think that's inspirational for anyone, anywhere, that you want to be the best that you can be and strive to be equal, if not greater than anyone in the world. He also wanted to start a school to train other entrepreneurs in the country and help build up his own country. The government was like, Ma, you're going too far. You're trying to usurp our power, and Jack Ma disappeared. These kind of things. Just imagine today in USA, if, for example, Elon Musk just suddenly disappears. Like, think about the news that would be, or equivalent to, like, say Steve Jobs just suddenly would just disappear, or Bill Gates would just disappear. It's that kind of level of, person in their society just disappeared. That's the power of the government. And so those kind of things is a massive risk. You also had a tennis star, Peng Shuai. She made a complaint about sexual harassment from essentially a Chinese official, and she disappears. So these kind of, strong arm tactics, it makes it very real, difficult to be bullish on anything to do with China, because the government is so basically communist, so strong. It is a real problem. Delisting always remains a risk for any company traded on the U.S. equities. This delisting could come forced from the U.S. government, or could come forced from the Chinese government. Could come from either way. So you have two-way risk of delisting. Also, too, the U.S. government is concerned if Americans do invest in any kind of Chinese company, is that company involved with developing military technology for the Chinese military? Because if there is an invasion in Taiwan, we do not want American investors to be giving money to essentially Chinese companies and support the Chinese military. And also, too, are American investors investing, when they invest in Chinese companies, investing to companies that have close ties to Chinese politicians? This is also an issue, and essentially why we've been talking, and the U.S. and the China have been talking about getting better accounting books, and they've been trying to negotiate that and have full transparency, which China does not want to give. And this creates another yet problem. Even the books that we do get, or the books that we do look at, are the P ratios, the revenues, the expenses, right, the bottom lines. Are these all fake? And that could be a real thing with many, many Chinese companies out there. You also remember Luckin Coffee, these kind of stuff. And so even though if a company looks attractive on paper, the numbers could be all fake. Another problem we have with Chinese stocks is there's a lot of pump and dumps. There's a lot of insider trading. There's a lot of essentially illegal activity. And again, this is also tied to transparency and tied to a very different system than we have in the USA, where culturally there are certain standards that don't exist in China. Yes, there's corruption in the USA. Yes, there's corruption in the market, but the corruption and sort of insider trading and shenanigans going on in China is even to a greater degree, and always remains a risk for any investor looking to invest in China. Also, too, the structure of many of these shares that are traded on the U.S. market are through ADRs or / shell companies, and so essentially you're buying pieces of paper from the Cayman Islands, and it's not actual real shares of Chinese companies. So this has been a big problem for years, and officially the Chinese government and the U.S. government have always sort of what's the right word to say? This has been in a gray area for these kind of things. So essentially, the kind of Chinese government has kind of looked the other way, and same with the USA. So again, just do be aware of the ADR structure does pose a great risk just by the very nature of how these investments in Chinese companies are structured. Also, too, you have U.S. Sanctions and restrictions on Chinese tech companies. It started with chips. Now we're talking AI. We're also talking quantum computing. And this is something that will continue as the USA is worried that China may take the lead in tech. And USA is also concerned about, again, American investors going into technology that will help the Chinese government either build up the military or surveil their citizens or control their citizens in those kind of ways. So this is something that is happening as well. Another thing that may occur is a continuation of the U.S.-China trade war. This could be, goods, this can be workers, could be any number of things, and these trade wars are real and they're costly for both sides. But that's what a trade war is. Also, too, now we're talking about demographics. So first we talked about, Xi, then we talked about some different policies. Now we're talking about sort of the demographics of the country, which, in my opinion, make China less attractive than it was in the past. Number one, you have a shrinking population. Before, China was like, essentially really attractive because it's this massive market. It's growing. Look at all these people that are going to buy our stuff, essentially, is what you're saying. And look at this great workforce. But now you have a shrinking population and a population that might have peaked. Also, too, with the one-child policy, which I'm sure you guys are aware of, it sort of shrank the fertility rate. So you can see here in the 1980s, you had birth rate, per woman of 2.6, and that has gone down considerably now in 2021. Birth rate is 1.15, and compare that to, say, fertility in USA, which is 1.6, or Japan, which is 1.3. So China's birth rate has definitely come to a slow compared to what it used to be. You also have a very real coming social crisis, and this is something that is very similar in the USA and many countries, in fact. There's just not enough workers compared to all of the retirees, right? So essentially, it's like a pyramid in the wrong direction. There's too many old people and not enough workers, and this is a looming economic crisis that's going to happen probably about the end of the decade. Also, too, as China develops, their workers become more educated and they become more expensive. And so certainly this has been less attractive for American companies to come into a market. Although, yes, the Chinese market is a big economy and has a lot of growing middle class. However, again, workers cost more money, and companies are looking for different ways to manufacture goods. Also more. There's a lot. Evergrande housing crisis could end up being one of the biggest things, even bigger than President Xi as a problem. This could essentially sink the world economy if it ends up being really bad. Is this a Lehman Brothers moment? That's the question everyone's asking. They try to hide these numbers as much as they can, but when you see Chinese going for bank runs, when you see Chinese protesting in lobbies, when you see Chinese threatening to hurt themselves in the lobbies of said companies, this is a very real thing, and it's predicated on essentially the domino effect of bad loan after bad loan after bad loan, unfinished houses, and people who gave deposits and are not seeing that money back. This is a very serious thing, and I feel sorry for all the people involved with this who lost essentially their life savings over this. So keep an eye on this. This is a very real problem. Also, too, you have a slowing GDP. They just released their GDP numbers as of recording this. Came out at 3.9. The government wanted 5.5. This is a far cry from the double-digit growth that we saw leading up to the Beijing Olympics. I was actually in China during this period. That was a very exciting time to be in China, but essentially gone downhill from there, to be fairly frank. That might have been the peak of China's growth, and now we have a slowing GDP. It's still growing, but it's nowhere near what it was, and so people who are sort of investing in China thinking that you're going to get these crazy growth numbers is simply not there. Also, too, we're going into a global recession with almost every country in the world facing inflation problems, money printing problems, and all these kind of things. So it's not China alone, it's just China also has additional problems compared to other countries. Another problem as well, you have poor investor sentiment. Essentially, once you lose faith with investors, which investing is a lot about faith, you're putting money into a company, betting on the future to be positive. Once you sort of lose that investment, it's hard to get it back. And I'm sure you guys know that's why you're watching this video. Like, what is going on? I myself, have seen a lot the last couple of years, and it's hard for me to feel positive about China. Yes, I do understand that people say, well, when investment's really low, that's the time to get in. But I am illustrating all the risks so that you understand them clearly. Also, too, we're in a situation where people want to retreat to safety. That could be cash or could just be investing in good old USA. That's when Warren Buffett's strategy. He says, don't bet against the Americans. I agree with that. Don't bet against the Americans. And this is a thing. But we're also facing global recession. So even the Americans, it's a little bit risky to have confidence in many things that are going on in the U.S. economy as well. If you do want to invest in the Chinese stocks, I just do have some recommendations, which I think are pretty safe. One would be limit your exposure. So it doesn't mean, like I say, if you want to do it, go for it, but limit your exposure. Don't be yoling this kind of stuff. I wouldn't recommend that because the risk is just too high. Also, too, I'd say get Hong Kong shares is probably safer than getting the other ADRs because at least you have some protection, okay? And the last one would be if you're also thinking about doing that, consider just doing ETFs. That may be safer. Many times the way the ETFs are structured is that they have ADRs in it, not necessarily the way the ETFs are structured is that they have Hong Kong shares in it, not the ADR. So do check out the structure of the ETFs. Another way you could do this as well is you can just simply trade the Chinese stocks. Don't think about investing in things, holding these for a lifetime. Just trade them because there's just so much risk. Also, too, if you want to go for a developing nation, you could take a look at India, or you could take a look at Vietnam, which has more attractive growth rates in the period that we're in right now. So, there's a lot of risk to investing in the Chinese stocks, and I hope all these things are clear and laid out, for you. If I left anything out, please let me know in the comments, or if you disagree with any of these risks, please let me know. Or if you think the rewards something that I overlooked, also please let me know. Let me know your favorite Chinese companies that you're looking at, and thank you again for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.